We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Nicole Byer, helping you make those rooms flyer. Today's style tip: when it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild! Like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Ooh, fierce! This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
Ready to make a real impact every day? Join the Active Day Home Care team and help clients maintain their independence in the comfort of their own homes. Make a difference in someone's life as you provide essential daily assistance and protect their health and happiness. Earn up to $20 an hour and enjoy additional perks like optional daily pay, 401k, paid time off, ongoing educational training, and more. Join a team that values care, compassion, and your professional growth. Visit activeday.com to apply.
Okay, so you guys have really outdone yourselves this time. The collection of search terms you've sent in. I mean, wow. Talk about a glimpse into what's making everyone tick when it comes to the stock market, huh?
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, we're talking everything from the names of those big indices, you know, the ones everyone always hears about, to those kind of like infamous moments in market history, right?
Yeah, those flashpoints that really grab the headlines.
Exactly. And it really feels like you've handed us a roadmap to like break this whole thing wide open, you know?
You've given us the guide to decode the market, basically.
Exactly, because we've got everything here. Searches on the S&P 500, the Dow Jones, NASDAQ, then historical events like, Black Monday, and then the tools people are using, futures, stocks, even down to where you guys are getting your information from, you know? Like, are we talking traditional news, social media? It's all in here.
And let's not forget the broader market themes, right? Like anxieties around bear markets, talk of potential crashes. It's all represented in this data.
Right. And yeah, I mean, it's a lot to unpack, but that's kind of what we do here, right? The whole point is to cut through the noise, zero in on what really matters.
Yeah.
We want to give everyone listening a clear sense of what these terms actually mean.
And why they should care, right?
Absolutely. So whether you're just dipping your toes into the world of finance, or maybe you're trying to make sense of the latest headlines, you know, whatever your reason for tuning in, let's dive in together and really unpack all this. What do you say?
Sounds like a plan.
All right, so let's tackle the big ones right out of the gate, huh? The major indices, the ones you always hear about. So many searches on the S&P 500. We saw SP 500, S&P 500 index, even some folks searching for S&P 500.
Some creative spelling in there?
Yeah, right? Like, close enough. But hey, it gets the point across, right? So the S&P 500, I mean, it's basically like a snapshot of the biggest companies in the U.S. economy, right?
Yeah, think of it as the all-star team of U.S. corporations. It tracks the performance of 500 of those big publicly traded companies, which is why it's such a closely watched indicator, you know, gives you a good feel for the overall health of the market.
Right. So it's kind of like taking the temperature of those big players, right? Making sure corporate America isn't coming down with something.
Exactly.
Now, we also saw a ton of searches for the Dow Jones Industrial Average, you know, the Dow. We saw Dow Jones, Drugia, the Dow, all sorts of variations.
I love the Dow.
They do. And it's interesting because it's got this much smaller focus, right? It's just 30 companies, but they're like the giants, right?
Yeah, the blue chips, the household names. Coca-Cola, Boeing, you know, companies with a long history in a big footprint.
So it's much more like concentrated view, right?
Exactly. And that's actually one of the points that often comes up about the Dow. Some people argue that because it only tracks 30 companies, it might not always be a perfectly accurate representation of the entire market.
Yeah.
You know, compared to the S&P 500, which has a much wider lens.
So it's all about perspective, right? Do you want the big picture of the S&P, or do you want to zoom in on a select group of powerful players, the Dow?
Precisely.
Now, shifting gears a bit, we also saw a lot of interest in the NASDAQ composite, right? NASDAQ index, NASDAQ today, that kind of thing.
Ah, the NASDAQ, the home of all things tech, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So whenever you see a lot of movement in the NASDAQ, you can bet something big's happening in the tech world. We also saw searches for NASDAQ futures specifically. So this is basically like people trying to guess or maybe protect themselves from big swings in those tech stocks, right?
It is. Futures contracts in general, and we'll dive into those a little more in a bit, are a way for investors to sort of bet on or hedge against future price movements. In this case, it's those tech-heavy companies that are driving the NASDAQ.
Gotcha. So we've got the S&P 500, broad view, the Dow, that select group, and then the NASDAQ, keeping an eye on the tech world. But, the U.S. markets, they're not the only game in town, right?
Oh, absolutely not.
We saw some searches popping up for European markets, even specific ones like FTSE and FTSE 100.
Right. So that tells me people are realizing, the stock market, it's a global network. What happens in one part of the world, it ripples out.
Totally. So the FTSE 100, that's the main index over in the UK, right? Tracks the top 100 companies listed on the London Stock Exchange. And then, of course, we had a few searches for global markets more broadly, which makes sense, right? If you're really going to understand the stock market, you got to think big picture, global scale. Oh, and even a search for Dow Jones Index, which I think just shows people are still trying to figure out all the different flavors of the Dow.
Yeah, the industrial average is definitely the most famous one, but there are others under that umbrella, right? Like the Dow Jones Transportation Average, the Dow Jones Utility Average.
Right. It's a whole family of Dow Jones indices. So now let's actually talk about what's being traded on these exchanges. Stocks. No surprise there. We saw stocks today, stocks live, stocks to buy now, even a few stocks markets thrown in there.
People want to know what's happening, and they want to know now.
Real-time information is key, right? So to break it down to the basics, a stock is basically a little piece of a company. You buy a stock, you become a shareholder, you've got a stake in that company, you share in its successes, and its failures too.
And those searches for stocks today and stocks live, they show that people really want to track the value of those shares moment by moment, right?
Yeah.
They want to know how much their piece of the company is worth right now.
Absolutely. And then, things get a little more interesting when we start talking about futures.
A little more complex, maybe.
Yeah, maybe a little, but don't worry, we'll break it down. So we saw a bunch of searches around futures, like futures market, stock market futures, and then specific ones, Dow futures, S&P 500 futures, NASDAQ futures, you name it.
Right. So think of a future as a sort of a promise, a contract. It's an agreement to buy or sell something. It could be a stock index like those you mentioned, or commodities like oil, gold, even agricultural products like corn or wheat at a certain price on a certain date in the future.
Right. So it's kind of like saying, hey, I think the price of oil is going to go up, so I'm going to lock in a price to buy it at today, even though I won't actually get it until later. Something like that.
Exactly. And investors use them for all sorts of reasons. Some use them to try to profit from those predicted price movements. Others use them to protect themselves against potential losses, to hedge their bets. And those searches for when do futures open, they tell us that the timing of these agreements is pretty important to a lot of people.
Makes sense. It's all about timing, right? Now, along with those, we also saw a few searches for specific ETFs, those exchange-traded funds. Things like SPY stock, QQ, even IVV.
Yeah, ETFs. Those are kind of like pre-packaged bundles of stocks.
A grab bag of investments, basically.
Pretty much. They're designed to track a specific index or sector, so you can diversify your investments without having to buy a bunch of individual stocks. So, for example, SPY, that one holds the stocks that make up the S&P 500. QQQ, that one often tracks the largest non-financial companies in the NASDAQ. And IVV, that's another one that follows the S&P 500.
Okay, so it's like instant diversification. You don't have to pick and choose every single stock. You just buy the whole basket.
Exactly. They're a pretty popular way to invest, especially for folks who maybe aren't super familiar with picking individual stocks.
Gotcha. Now, let's face it, the market doesn't always go up, right? We all know that. And we saw some searches reflecting that, like the anxieties around those big market downturns. First up, Black Monday. We saw a ton of searches for Black Monday 1987, specifically.
Yeah, that one's burned into a lot of people's memories, right?
For sure. It was a huge crash, massive decline in stock markets all over the world, happened on October 19th, 1987, a single day that had a lasting impact. And, it's interesting because we also saw a search for Black Monday 2025.
Uh-oh, people are worried about the future.
Well, it seems that way, right? It's like the possibility of another big crash, it's always lurking in the back of everyone's minds. But, we can't predict the future, so who knows what'll happen. Now, besides those sudden, sharp drops, we also have to talk about those more sustained periods of decline, right? The bear market. We saw people searching for bear market. What is a bear market? All that good stuff.
Right. So a bear market, basically, it's when stock prices have fallen by at least 20% from their recent highs, and they're showing no signs of bouncing back anytime soon.
So it's not just a dip, it's like a prolonged slump.
Exactly. And it's usually tied to worries about the economy slowing down, maybe even slipping into a recession. It's a sign that investors are getting nervous. And then, of course, we have the more general term, market crash, which usually refers to those rapid, steep drops like Black Monday. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a full 20% decline to qualify as a crash. It's more about the speed and the severity of the drop.
So it's like a crash is sudden and dramatic, while a bear market is more like a slow burn, a prolonged downturn.
That's a big way to think about it.
Now, to keep up with all this, you got to know where to find good information, right? And your searches actually gave us a pretty clear picture of where everyone's turning to for their news. We saw Yahoo Finance, Yahoo Finance, all pointing to that popular website.
It's a classic, right? Yahoo Finance. It's been around forever.
It has. And then, of course, we saw the traditional news outlets like CNBC Futures and CNN Money showing that people still rely on those sources. Even the CNE Times popped up, proving that old school newspapers are still in the game. And then we also saw searches for Fidelity investments, which makes sense, right? If you're a Fidelity customer, you're probably checking their website for updates. But here's the interesting part. We also saw searches for Trump Truth Social Trope, Truth Social, and sometimes even alongside Donald Trump tariff stock market.
Now that is interesting. What do you make of that?
Well, to me, it shows how much social media has become a part of the financial landscape. People aren't just relying on traditional news anymore. They're looking to social platforms, to influencers, even to political figures to try to get a sense of where the market's headed. And it really underscores how information and market sentiment can be shaped by all these different voices. It's not just about the numbers anymore. It's about the narratives that are being built around those numbers.
I think you're right. It adds a whole new layer of complexity to trying to understand the market.
It does. And then we also saw more general searches like stock news and best news, which just shows that people are hungry for information. They want to stay in the loop.
And they want it from sources they trust, right?
Absolutely. Okay, so let's get down to brass tacks here, the nitty-gritty of how the market actually works. The sheer volume of searches we saw around when does the stock market open and when does the stock market close, with all those variations, like what time does Dow Jones open, it really highlights a fundamental piece of information that a lot of people are still trying to figure out.
It's the basics, right? When can I buy and sell?
Exactly. So for the New York Stock Exchange, where a lot of these major stocks trade, regular trading hours are typically 9:30 a.m. to 4:00 p.m. Eastern Time, Monday through Friday. And, the fact that so many people are searching for this, it tells me it's worth repeating. It's important information to have.
It is. And then, there are all those other terms that pop up, like pre-market trading, which shows that people are aware that trading can happen even before the official opening bell.
Right. So even before the market opens, there's already action happening behind the scenes.
Exactly. Pre-market trading allows investors to buy and sell stocks before those regular hours begin, although it's usually lower volume and the prices can be a bit more volatile.
Gotcha. So it's like the early bird gets the worm, but maybe also a little more risk involved.
Something like that.
Yeah.
And then you have all those searches for live stock market live, current stock market now, which all emphasize the desire for real-time information, right?
Yeah.
People want to see what's happening in the market this very second.
It's like everyone's glued to their screens watching the numbers tick up and down.
Pretty much. And for those who like a more visual representation, we saw searches for stock market graph and Dow Jones chart, even just Dow chart. Charts and graphs are a great way to see those historical trends, to get a sense of how the market has behaved over time.
It's all about finding the way that works best for you, right? Whether it's numbers, charts, news headlines, whatever, helps you make sense of it all. Now, we also saw a lot of searches that were clearly trying to figure out the why behind all those market movements, right? Things like, why are stocks up today? Why is the market up today? Or on the flip side, why is the market dropping?
People want explanations, right? They want to know what's driving those changes.
For sure. They want to know if it's something they should be worried about or if it's just, a normal blip on the radar. And of course, the big fear for a lot of people, judging by the search, is the stock market crashing? Is that possibility of a major downturn?
It's a natural concern, especially after seeing what happened on Black Monday, right?
Absolutely. And then connecting this back to real-world events, we saw that search for Donald Trump tariff stock market. And when do tariffs go into effect?
Right. Tariffs, trade wars, those are things that investors watch very closely because they can have a real impact on company profits and on overall market confidence.
They add a layer of uncertainty, right? Because tariffs are basically taxes on imported goods, so they can affect companies that do business internationally. And sometimes they lead to retaliation from other countries, which can further disrupt those trade relationships.
It's a complex issue, and it's definitely one that investors factor into their decisions.
Now, let's zoom in on a few specific companies here. We saw mentions of GE stock and TSLA pre-market, which tells us people are interested in individual company performance, not just the overall market.
Yeah, those are popular stocks for sure. GE, General Electric, that's a long-standing company with a lot of history. And TSLA, well, that's Tesla, the electric car company.
Right, and the select pre-market search shows that people are really interested in those pre-market trading hours, especially for those high-profile, actively traded stocks. It's like they want to get a jump on the day, see what's happening before the market officially opens, and then, we can connect this back to those ETF searches we talked about earlier, like SPY stock price and QQ stock. It shows that people are interested not only in those individual companies, but also in those broader investment vehicles that track specific sectors or indices.
Right, they're looking at both the micro and the macro view, trying to get a sense of the market from all angles.
Now, finally, let's talk about making sense of all this information. We saw a lot of searches that included words like today, now, and specific days of the week like Dow futures for Monday and Friday.
The need for speed, right?
Absolutely. Real-time information is king. So when you see Dow futures today or S&P 500 today, it's all about what's happening right now or what those futures markets suggest about the day ahead, market today, all that. And then, there were searches like Stock Market 2025, which is really interesting, right?
Looking into the crystal ball, huh?
Exactly. Trying to get a glimpse of the future, though, of course, predictions that far out are anyone's guess. But it shows that people are thinking about the long term, about where the market might be headed in the years to come. And then we had searches like new, latest stock market, best stock market, all highlighting that constant desire to stay up to date.
It's a fast-moving world. Got to keep up.
You do. And then lastly, Dow pre-market. Again, that focus on those early trading hours.
People are trying to get ahead of the game.
All right, so let's wrap this up. This deep dive into your stock market searches has really been eye-opening, huh? We've covered a ton of ground, from the major indices like the S&P 500, the Dow Jones, and the NASDAQ, to those fundamental tools of the trade, stocks, and futures. We've talked about those historical events that shape the market, like Black Monday, and explored all the different ways people are getting their information, from traditional news to social media and everything in between.
We've even talked about the psychology of the market, those anxieties around crashes and bear markets, and the constant need to understand what's driving those market movements.
Exactly. And hopefully by the end of all this, we've demystified some of those complex terms and concepts, giving you a solid foundation to build on, right?
I think so. At the end of the day, the goal is to empower people with knowledge, to help them navigate this sometimes confusing world of finance.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. With all this information constantly coming at us, from real-time stock prices and historical charts to news headlines and social media updates, what single piece of information do you find most crucial to track? And maybe more importantly, why is that piece of information so important to you? What does it tell you about the market, and how does it influence your decisions?
It's a good question to ponder. Because at the end of the day, it's all about finding the signals that make sense to you, the ones that help you make informed decisions.
Well said. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. We'll see you next time.
Until then.